Okay, today we're going to wrap up everything we've been discussing regarding parts of speech. So, we still have quite a few parts of speech categories to get through, and that's what this lecture is dedicated towards. So, we're going to address all of these that you see here on this slide. To recap, we have learned quite a bit about syntax so far. So we've learned subject, verb, object, or subject, verb. Based on our last lecture on verbs, you guys are able to look at this and identify that there's multiple verbs in these sentences. And based on our last lecture, you should be able to look closely at those verbs that identify what type of verbs we're working with. So Alex was eating cereal. We know that we have an auxiliary verb and that we have a core verb, right? A main verb, eating. We also know based on our nouns and pronouns lecture that Alex is a noun, cereal is a noun. So in general, you guys could look at these sentences and based on the information I've given you, be able to come up with a reasonable breakdown of the parts of speech in these sentences. Now I will point out that there are a couple words in these sentences we haven't discussed yet, or at least not in depth. So we're going to discuss those today. By the end of this lecture, you'll know what parts of speech those are. And you'll also be able to identify the parts of speech to these words that I've now added to those example sentences. So instead of Alex was eating cereal, we now have Alex was quickly eating cereal and toast with butter. Instead of the cat might be killing the mouse, it's the cat might be killing the mouse today. My professor could have been recording the lectures. Wow, the crazy cow has jumped over the fence. So I've added some new words here because I want to illustrate to you the other parts of speech that we're going to be covering today. So by the end of this lecture, you should be able to look at this page and know what parts of speech each of those words are functioning as. So we want to recap, we want to finish up parts of speech today by covering all of the lexical categories, all of the parts of speech. And here on this slide, I have them all listed for you. We have them broken down by function words and content words. I've put stars next to the 4 that we've already covered. We've already looked at auxiliary verbs and verbs, so action, linking, and stative. We've already looked at pronouns, and we've already looked at nouns. Those were 3 to 4 big categories, so we've done a lot of the heavy lifting. We do have quite a few other parts of speech to look at though. So determiners or articles, prepositions, conjunctions, adjectives, adverbs, and there's a category that I have off to the right called interjections. Those are basically function words, but not completely. So function words are words that help grammatically connect sentences. So they're words like up, down, she, her, his, the, a, and, words we use all the time. I have that sorry, we're closed sign there because these are closed classes, meaning we're not generating new function words. We're not generating new pronouns every year or new prepositions every year. These are closed classes. Classes. We already have our list made. We already know what we use as conjunctions, and we don't add new words to that. So we're not constantly expanding our function word base. Interjections are kind of like function words. However, once I show you what they are, you'll realize we do create new function words all the time when it comes to interjections, specifically that category. So I have it under function words, but it's not entirely just a closed class. Content words, on the other hand, there's a lot of these. Nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. I had a quick memory check here for you. Of the 100 most frequently used words in English, we covered this back in morphology. Are most of them content words or function words? If you knew, you knew, and if you don't, you're in your head guessing right now. Most of them are function words. So some of the oldest, and most of those are Germanic, right? They're all Germanic words. 70% of them, or 90% of them, came from our native Germanic Old English language, okay? And they are function words. We've had words like her and his and the and a for a very long time. They are the most frequently used words in English, and that's why we use mostly function words. When we talk about content words, nouns, there's hundreds and hundreds of nouns. For example, cat is a noun. How many of you use the noun cat today in a sentence? I'm not sure many of you did. So it's not a common word, even though I use it as an example in this class a lot. I can't be sure that there's one noun we all use today. So there's such a wide class. I want to start, though, by finishing up these parts of speech by first going into adjectives. And you'll notice if you go back to Canvas, I've posted some cool videos. They're 2 to 3 minute videos actually designed for children that will teach you what an adjective is or teach you what a conjunction is. I encourage you to watch those. You can stop this presentation now and go watch adjectives and then come back so you can watch it in order as you listen to this lecture, or watch them at the end or beforehand. It doesn't matter, but I think they will help solidify in the information. Adjectives we have talked about at one point back in morphology, right? At that time we went over nouns a little bit, adjectives, adverbs, and verbs. We're going to dive deeper today. So adjectives describe something about the noun or pronoun. They modify the noun or pronoun. I have those words bolded for a reason because you need to realize that adjectives don't modify or describe anything else. They only describe nouns or pronouns. So, the handsome man, a gorgeous woman, the wedding was quiet, the cat is heavy. Handsome describes the man, gorgeous describes the woman, quiet describes the wedding, heavy describes the cat. You'll notice here that I've drawn a line to our linking verbs. We just went over linking verbs, and remember they were different than action verbs or stative verbs because they just describe something about the noun, essentially. The cat equals heavy, the wedding equals quiet. You might see a linking verb and know that an adjective is nearby. And notice that adjectives don't have to happen right before the noun. The handsome man. In that case, the adjective occurs right before the noun. Because in the last two examples I gave you, the adjective is actually after the verb. Okay, so a little heuristic or tip or trick. These adjectives may occur between an article and a noun. Other things might occur there too, but basically when you say the handsome man, I know that it's going to be, this heuristic is telling me that an adjective might occur before the noun man, might occur after the article the, so I know that if I see a word there, I'm probably dealing with an adjective. Adjectives and morphemes. So a lot of chapter 4 is starting to connect with how we identify parts of speech. Remember, some bound morphemes might be an indication that the word is an adjective. The bag is reusable. We talked about the able morpheme, and we talked about how that can take verbs and turn them into adjectives. The beautiful woman, we talked about the full morpheme and how that makes adjectives. We also have two other, when we looked at those inflectional and derivational morphemes, there were two morphemes that do commonly attach to adjectives. The heavier bag by the stairs. So the ER, we can use the ER on a lot of adjectives to for a comparative, right? The heavier bag means I'm comparing two bags, one is heavier. So the heavier bag by the stairs, heavier is an adjective describing bag. Or this is the heaviest book. I can use the morpheme, the free bound morpheme ist. This is the heaviest book as the superlative, right? So it's still an adjective. It's describing the book. It is the heaviest book. So again, I want to recap that adjectives describe something about the noun or pronoun. They don't describe about anything else in the sentence. And we have to be clear on that as we move into adverbs in just a second. So adjectives follow rules, whether you know it or not. If we were in class, this exercise is usually super fun. I would give you a list of examples like this, and I would say, which one sounds better? The former child actress or the child former actress? Red big barns or big red barns? A nice clean metal fork or a clean metal nice fork? So you would look at these in class. Typically the class pretty much is about 90% similar and agreeing on what one sounds better. And I would ask you this question. So based on this exercise, based on looking at this list and realizing some might sound better than others, can you observe a rule about adjectives that we have in our language? And the reality is you're observing it, but you're not aware of it. And here's what that rule is. Adjectives follow a certain order. We can use more than one adjective when describing a noun, right? The red big barn, the big red barn. There's multiple adjectives there. But when we use multiple adjectives, we put them in a certain order. We usually start with order of opinion, size, physical quality, shape, age, color, origin, material, type, purpose. You can use tons of adjectives to describe a noun, but you're typically following this pattern. No one taught you this pattern. This is something you implicitly picked up over time. You might have your L2 students have some errors in this because they don't know this pattern. This might be something you explicitly teach them, but there is an order, there is a rule for how we use our adjectives. So I asked you in the last slide, which sounded better, a red big barn or a big red barn? The answer is technically a big red barn. If you say a red big barn, I still understand what you're saying, but it's not following the rule. So I might think, oh, that sounded a little weird, but I still knew what you were saying. By saying big red barn, we are following this order rule. I'm using size first, and then the next description is the color. So I'm going from 1 through 10 and putting my adjectives in order. There are lots of types of adjectives, so we could say there's different categories of adjectives. I don't need you to know those, just be able to find adjectives, okay? But we have talked about a couple of these categories, so I wanted to do a callback when we were talking about pronouns, because there were lots of types of pronouns, which you do need to know those. We mentioned possessive adjectives and demonstrative adjectives at that time. So those are adjectives, right? They fit our rule that they describe something about the noun. So a possessive adjective, my house is a mess. We had looked at this next to possessive pronouns because my can function as a pronoun. But in this case, it's an adjective. It's describing something about the house. It's describing that it's my house. We also had demonstrative adjectives. This house is a mess. It's describing which house we're talking about. We're talking about this house. Another reason why I brought this up, especially with the demonstrative adjectives, is that you might see some L1, L2 interference when working with Spanish speakers in terms of these demonstrative adjectives, specifically that in Spanish, all adjectives can be singular and plural, right? So alto means tall, altos means tall, but it's the plural form. But English only has 2 adjectives that can be singular and plural. Not all of them like Spanish, but in English there are only 2 that can be singular and plural. There's this and that, these and those. This is singular, these is plural. That is singular, those are plural. So L2 speakers, Spanish speakers who are beginning English speakers, their L2 is their target language, you may notice that they forget to use the plural forms of these in English, because in English, all adjectives are in the singular form. So based on that rule and based on that observation, they may forget that this and that actually do have plural forms. Let's switch to adverbs, and if you haven't, I would encourage you to pause and go watch that little clip in Canvas. So adverbs can modify everything in a sentence, but they cannot modify a noun or pronoun, because the only thing that can modify a noun or pronoun is an adjective. When an adverb modifies different parts of the sentence, they're explaining place, time, circumference, manner, cause, degree. There's a short list of what it's doing. You can learn that if you want. But mostly I just want you to observe that adverbs can do a lot of modification. They can modify a verb. The woman was sweetly quieting the man down. They can modify an adjective. So adjectives modify nouns, but adverbs can modify the adjective. The very handsome man. So it's modifying the adjective by telling me the intensity of handsomeness. It can also modify a full sentence. So yesterday I went to a wedding. We're going to look a little closer at this. So if that went over your head, it's okay. We're going into it. Remember, some bound morphemes might be an indication that the word is an adverb. So he works harder than you. I can use the ER for comparative to talk about the adverb describing the verb works. So he works harder. Harder is modifying the verb works. It's not describing the noun, the pronoun he. She arrived earliest. I can also use the EST for superlative. So instead of early, I can have earliest. He left angrily. I can turn angry into angrily. So most adverbs can take that ly. Not all of them, but most of them can take that ly ending. If you look at this list of heuristics, the ly ending is really the most unique. That separates it from the adjectives, right? Because those first two can the er for comparative, the est for superlative, those could also possibly look like adjectives. Those were shared heuristics with the adjectives. But what we have to remember is that an adverb can modify everything in sentence but a noun or pronoun. So when we're trying to decide, harder, it ends in er. Adjectives and adverbs can both take that er comparative. What am I looking at? We need to be aware of where is our noun or pronoun. What's modifying what? So let's look at these side by side. Here I'm showing you how those two heuristics look different. The first heuristic I gave you for both of these is that they can take the er for the comparative. The heavier bag, he works harder. Remember, an adjective can only modify a noun, so the heavier is the adjective, bag is the noun. He works harder. Adverbs can modify everything but a noun. So harder describes the verb works, is modifying the verb works. This is the heaviest book. That's an adjective. It's modifying or describing the noun book. She arrived earliest. Earliest is not describing the noun or pronoun she earliest. No, it's describing the arrival. It was the earliest arrival. So I know that I'm working with an adverb at that time. Adverbs, another thing I just mentioned to you, is that they can modify a full sentence. They can move around. So, pardon me, they can modify everything in a sentence, but again, not a noun or pronoun. And I made the comment or illustration to you that they can modify a full sentence. So I gave you the example of yesterday I went to a wedding. When I'm looking at adverbs that modify a full sentence, I can check to see if that's what I'm working with by looking to see if I can move it around. So, in fact, I can with the word yesterday. I went to a wedding yesterday. So I can move it to the front of the sentence or the end of the sentence because I'm noticing that it's modifying the full sentence. It's not stuck or strictly bound to the beginning of the sentence. I can move it to the end. So if you're wondering if I'm working with an adverbial phrase is something we'll talk about in an upcoming lecture. One heuristic or one test is to see, can I move it to the end or the beginning of the sentence, and does the meaning remain the same? So we started with adjectives and adverbs for a reason, because there's often some errors that not only second language speakers, but native speakers like you and me will make, because we're not adhering to these prescriptive rules, but there is a structure to the language. Let's talk about the difference between, oh, that's real sad, and that's really sad. One of those is not technically syntactically correct. The other is. And if you know that I use asterisks by the incorrect sentence, then you know that's real sad is technically incorrect. And here's why. That's real sad. That's really sad. Sad is an adjective, right? He is sad. The cat is sad. Sad is describing something about the noun. In this sentence, that is the noun or pronoun, right? Sad is describing how that feels. Okay, sad is my adjective. Real, and that's real sad. Real is also an adjective, okay? But adjectives don't modify adjectives. Adjectives, as I've tried to reiterate quite a bit, can only modify nouns and pronouns. So I can't use an adjective to describe an adjective. I can only use, based on the definitions I've given you, adverbs to describe adjectives, okay? So that's why that's real sad is not correct, because I'm using an adjective real to describe the adjective sad, and we can't do that. We can use the adverb really to describe the adjective sad based on the definitions I've given you. You'll notice that a lot of us struggle with these adjective-adverb pairs. It's not just second language speakers, it's native speakers as well. That went good. That went well. This is bad, or that went bad, that went badly. You can go through this list and you'll probably see a quiz question kind of questioning you on this, and see here's some adjectives and adverbs that we often will use incorrectly because we've just blurred the lines at this point, but there is a rule. So come back to the slide and look at it again later if you need to. But there is a reason why that's real sad doesn't work, and that's really sad does work. Let's move on to prepositions. Okay, prepositions. They express position and movement, possession time, and how an action is completed. In short, this is how you would teach a first grader this, okay? A preposition is anything that a squirrel can do to a tree. And that accounts for most prepositions, but not all of them, okay? But it does account for most of them. So the squirrel can go over the tree, under the tree, on the tree, by the tree, to the tree, in the tree. It can get off the tree. It can go against the tree, lean against the tree. So these prepositions, one quick way to know, I can call it a heuristic, I guess, is can a squirrel do it to a tree? And that might give you some indication. So prepositions are often found before nouns, pronouns, or noun phrases. You don't know what a noun phrase is yet. Again, future lecture. So again, the squirrel, or I want to see you in the house. Okay, so the house is a noun phrase. Basically, house is the noun we're looking at. So our heuristic is that they're found before a noun phrase or before a noun. So in is the preposition. It is before the house, the noun phrase. What I want to bring home to you, though, is that prepositions are not interchangeable. They're not synonyms of each other, okay? Because there's a real difference in meaning when you use certain prepositions. These two examples to make my point. I want to see you in the house now, Bill. I want to see you on the house now, Bill. Okay, both are demands. I can tell that Bill is in trouble, but why? But the difference between coming in the house and going on the house is strictly made by what prepositions are being used. So again, they're not interchangeable, which can lead to some funny errors when second language learners are learning how to use them. So there are three types of prepositions. You don't need to memorize this, just telling you this might help you elaborate on what a preposition is and what it means. There's time prepositions, so I will see you after school. Place prepositions, it is around the corner. Direction prepositions, she went down the hall. So speaking of errors that speakers might make, can you spot the prepositional errors in these sentences? Alex is acquainted to the president. We went a walk. I have been ill since 2 weeks. He was prevented to come. And these are actual real errors, types of errors that you might see in your classroom. And I'm going to show you, go to pause it if you want to think about it, but now I'm going to show you what those errors are. And as native speakers or as fluent speakers of English, you probably could identify that something was wrong and fix it. But there's some reasons some motivations that are driving these types of errors. So Alex is acquainted to the president. Alex is acquainted with the president. So that's just a confusion on what preposition can go with acquainted. The verb acquainted doesn't typically take the preposition to. It can take the preposition with. We went a walk. We went for a walk. So went for or go for a, went for a is a lexical collocation. A little earlier, before you saw our lecture on semantics and pragmatics, and I mentioned the lexical collocations there, but they're basically fixed expressions, and we use this, we went for a walk, we went for an ice cream or for ice cream as pretty much a fixed expression in English. So especially regarding sports and leisure activities. So the error is, and we went a walk, is that we have a fixed expression in English that it's went for this. We went for a walk. I have been ill since 2 weeks. The correction should be I have been ill 4 weeks. And part of this is that it drives from the verb been. Okay, so when we use have been structure, we can use for because we're going to indicate for an amount of time. We wouldn't use since with the been structure. So he was prevented to come. He was prevented from coming. So basically with most of these examples, except for the we went a walk, The air is really associated with confusion over the verb. So prevented, for example, prevented can be followed by the preposition from, but it can't be followed by the preposition to, and that's pretty much a fixed rule that we obey in the language. So a lot of the times prepositional errors, you'll notice are actually the student still learning what verbs can take which prepositions. Conjunctions, conjunction, junction, what's your function? Okay, I would watch this video because it really simplifies what a conjunction is. There are 3 types of conjunctions, and they hold words, phrases, or ideas together. Coordinating, subordinating, and correlative. Why did I say that wrong? Well, it is late, by the way. It's almost midnight. Those, we're going to go more in depth with those when we get to clauses in a different module. But just right now, use the basic definition that conjunctions hold words or phrases together. So I have example sentences. Do you want to go to Hawaii or Paris? We saw clowns, horses, and elephants. Both my brother and father are lawyers. You are mad because I was late. Sorry for the spelling error there. So for the point of understanding conjunctions and just parts of speech right now, we're just going to think about those coordinating conjunctions. And there's a really simple memory trick, which is just to remember the word fanboys. And this is an acronym for the 7 coordinating conjunctions, which are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Okay, so that's a quick cheat sheet, and many of you actually might be familiar with that. I remember a student is the one who told me about that last semester. Articles, we've talked about this a couple times this semester, but this is actually the easiest parts of speech class that we have in English because there are only 3. We have the fixed class, we have a fixed class, we have indefinite articles, a or an, we have a definite article, the, and then we also can technically say that we have no article because some words do not take an article. They don't need it. And that's also a grammar syntactic choice you're making. But we have to know that these 3 articles do have different meanings. What's the difference between do you have a book and do you have the book? Well, if I'm asking if you have the book, I'm probably looking for something specific that you and I have already talked about. I'm looking maybe for the Smurf book, right? If you came to me and say, do you have the book? I would immediately know you're talking either about our class required text or the Smurf book, right? Because we have that context, we have that shared knowledge. But if you came to me and said, do you have a book? I might not think you're looking for something specific. Maybe you're just looking for a book to use as so you can write, as a clipboard. I don't know, but there is a difference in meaning between those. You will notice your students making errors with articles. It's very common. So I bought new car yesterday rather than I bought a new car yesterday. There was beautiful sunrise this morning. There was a beautiful sunrise this morning. And there's a reason these errors are being made by certain classes of speakers, and that's because of all the languages in the world, 198 languages do not have articles. Their grammars or their syntactical rules do not need articles or require articles. And 45 languages that do have articles don't have the definite article. So that definite article in English is the, right? Maybe they have an equivalent of a or an, but they don't have the definite article the. And remember, the is something we can use when we have shared knowledge. Do you have the book? So you can see based on this, some of your students, right? Not necessarily Spanish speakers, they have articles, will be bringing in maybe a language, like Mandarin or Cantonese, right? Might be bringing in a language rules from their L1 that will prohibit them from using articles in English as their target language because they don't have that syntactic requirement in their first language. So that might be a good example of some L1 interference. Interjections, we're just going to go through really, really, really quickly. They're super simple. Interjections are abrupt remarks made especially as an aside or interruption. So here is just a small list of those, but like, yeah, wow. This can also include, um, oh no, what? Okay, so they are there. It's really not a complicated system. We're gonna move on from it. They're really fun, and they'll be really fun to teach because they're real fun for expression and understanding people. So, for example, the interjection "What?" is not me asking you a question. It's me showing shock, right? Okay, let's recap real quick because we got one more thing to do, and then we can wrap this up. We have so far looked at most parts of speech, okay? We've looked at everything on here except determiners. We have looked at articles, which is a subclass of determiners, and we're going to get to those in a second, and there's a reason why I'm putting that off for last. But at this point, we've done great. You've covered so much. You have learned so much grammar, and if you haven't learned it yet, you have been made aware of it and know what to study. So earlier in this lecture, I gave you these example slides and I said by the end of this lecture, you would be able to tell me about these additional parts of speech. And guess what? You can. If you want to pause and go ahead and figure out what parts of speech these circled words are, because we just covered them, go ahead and do that because I'm going to move to the next slide, which has the answers. So based on what I've introduced you to, we now can fill in the rest, identifying the rest of the parts of speech in these sentences. We know based on the rules that quickly is an adverb. It's modifying or describing the verb eating. We've got conjunctions and prepositions. We have articles and a couple adjectives, and we also have an interjection. So we've come a long way from needing to work with basic sentences like Alex eating cereal. Now you guys can work with sentences like Alex was quickly eating cereal and toast with butter. Okay, you've come a long way. But we want to move into one last category called determiners. I saved this for last for a reason. And I found this little article online that put words to my anxiety about this category. They called it a slippery grammatical label. Because, and I'll show you in a minute, some of these determiners are actually other parts of speech we've been looking at. Some articles, for example, are determiners. Many of the adjectives we've looked at are determiners. So some of the those possessive pronoun adjectives, those possessive adjectives, those fit under determiners. So I really struggled with this category name because I thought, but we have all these other parts of speech I've just explained, and now you're just washing it all together to call it a determiner. So I liked finding this article because it called it the slippery grammatical label. I'm like, what label is this when I've already labeled all these parts of speech? Why are you now blurring it with determiners? But it also explains it a little more, and it said determinals are functional elements of structure. They're not formal word classes. So it's not that we're looking anymore at these words as articles or adjectives or things like that. We're just going to look at these functional elements that happen basically before nouns. So yes, inside this class of determiners, you're going to see adjectives, you're going to see verbs, you're going to see adjectives, you're going to see adverbs, and we're still going to call those things. But we can also use this broader term determiners to describe all the structural things that are happening before a noun. So determiners is an umbrella term for a lot of the different words that occur before a noun or a pronoun. I think mostly just nouns. So an example sentence would be this: every single one of your last assignments were good. Okay? So now the noun in this sentence is assignments. And a determiner, these determiners are everything that basically occurs before this noun, with some exceptions that I'll show you in a second. So every single one of your last assignments were good. Those are all determiners. So this chart right here is a great explanation of basically what qualifies as a determiner. So the cat, the is a determiner if you compare it to this chart. 3 pigs, our house, some cheese, all of the very cheesy pizza, this vanilla Coke. So I would use this chart. If you look, there are 9 descriptions of what determiners are. This is just a quick reference chart. It doesn't include, it's not inclusive, it doesn't include everything, but it does kind of help break down what is a determiner and what is not. The problem I have with this class again is that some of these words we just talked about as other things. So look at the possessives column. My, our, your, his, her, it's, their. Those are literally possessive adjectives. You've learned it as possessive adjectives. That is what they are. But again, with determiners, we're just describing basic functional elements that occur before nouns, and we're talking about it as at large. We're talking about it, all those features as an umbrella term. We're not talking about the formal word classes because, yes, those are adjectives. There are a couple heuristics for identifying whether or not you're working with determiners, and we're going to go over each of these right now, starting with the first one. They always occur before the noun. So all of your last assignments were good. Assignments is the noun. All of your last represents 3 to 4 different determiners that are occurring before the noun. So our heuristic works. Our second heuristic, though, was they always occur before any adjectives that don't fit in that chart I just showed you used to describe the noun. So look at this example sentence. All of your last math assignments were good. Math is an adjective describing what type of assignments they were. So assignments is still a noun. Math is an adjective. All of your last, those are 3 to 4 determiners. And so our heuristic still works that they're used before any adjectives used to describe the noun. We had another heuristic, which is they always occur before any adverbs used to modify the adjectives. So this is a slippery slope because sometimes these adverbs might also, and these adjectives might also be on that chart. But here's an example sentence. I am asking the next very handsome man to dance. Okay, so here's an example where I have my adverb very, I have my adjective handsome, and my noun is dance. So I am asking. Asking is my verb, right? Am asking is my verb. We've got an auxiliary verb and asking our main verb. The next very handsome man to dance. So the next, those are 2 determiners used before my adverb, adjective, and noun. And so it's still obeying our heuristic rules. There was one last heuristic, which was that they are required, determiners are required by singular nouns, but they're not required by plural nouns. They're optional for plural nouns. So I'll give you an example sentence here. Women are good at dancing. Women is a plural noun, okay? But I can't say woman is good at dancing. The singular noun woman requires a determiner. It requires the woman or a woman is good at dancing. Now again, those are also articles, but this heuristic works for us in terms of identifying determiners as well. There are some parameters and rules that people are following with determiners, and there are some errors your students will make. So here's some examples of errors you might hear students produce. She gave me unadvice. Italy will face much challenges in the future. The restaurant is in the middle of my house. I was at a party with my friends. Okay, and as speakers of the language, you can look at this and correct it right away, but let's discuss what the underlying issues are. So the first one, she gave me unadvice. The error here is that we're using an incorrect, we're using a determiner with an uncountable noun. We can't use a or n determiners with uncountable nouns like advice. So we went over nouns a while ago, but uncountable nouns were one of those categories, like rice, right? She gave me a rice. We can't say she gave me a rice, but we can say she gave me rice to eat. Italy will face much challenges in the future. Well, type of noun, again, is important. We can't use much with a plural noun. So we have the noun, plural noun challenges, and we can't use much with that. We can use many challenges, but we can't say much. The restaurant is in the middle of the my home. Well, you can't use two referring determiners together. Some of these determiners, if you go back to that chart and you try to create example sentences, you realize you really can't layer them all up because there are some rules in terms of which ones you can use together. So we can't say the house and we can't say my house because those are both referring to the same object. Last one, I was at a party with some of my friends. Well, when we use these quantifiers, determiners, some and my, we have to use the word of. So I was at a party with some of my friends. Okay, good job. Very good. We have made it through all the lexical categories, all the parts of speech, and we have done it very quickly, and you've done it remotely. And I hope you contact me if you have any questions, and go ahead and move on to your next exercise and move on to your next quiz covering all of parts of speech when you're ready. Talk to you later.